We've all heard it before. Just one cycle. I'll just get to my natural limit and maintain from there. But the truth is, the method of taking anabolics, which the mainstream has dictated to be the safest, may not be all it's cracked up to be. So what are the approaches to anabolic use that we have at our disposal? Well, the first of which is the subject of today's video, cycling. This refers to a fixed period of time using anabolics, usually between 6 and 24 weeks of elevated supraphysiological doses, that's above natural levels, then coming off anabolics completely through the use of a post-cycle therapy or PCT. Then we have blast and cruise. For this method, we still have a fixed period of time between 6 and 24 weeks, usually, once again, of extended, heightened anabolics use. And then the user would drop down to natural replacement levels, basically somewhere between 100 milligrams and 150 milligrams of testosterone on its own per week, acting as replacement therapy for their natural production. And finally, we have permablast, a much less widely used approach, which basically pertains to using elevated doses over an indefinite time frame. So before we get into cycling, let's talk about the most popular method amongst bodybuilders, blast and cruise. Blast and cruise enables you to get the same benefits of cycling of that elevated dose, while also allowing you to drop down to replacement levels, which would be deemed healthier and would allow you to improve some of your health markers and reduce the amount of stress on your body. Replacement therapy is something common amongst males. After a certain age, many men jump on testosterone replacement in order to replace the natural levels which diminish over time. Though it's never healthy to inject an exogenous hormone, replacement therapy will generally be much safer than when you're running elevated doses. Unlike cycling, with blast and cruise, you're never truly off anabolics, which means that you have a higher chance of preserving muscle mass gain. This is preferred by bodybuilders for a couple of reasons. First of all, as mentioned, it's easier to retain muscle mass built, and at the end of the day, the last thing you want when you're pursuing a competitive bodybuilding career is to have any period of time where your progress may stall. The other reason is quite simply because their risk profile is much different to the average person just utilizing these drugs for a weekend at a festival. Extended anabolics use over years or even decades is bound to be detrimental. So the difference between TRT and coming off completely is fairly negligible. So why don't bodybuilders cycle off anabolic steroids? First, let's delve into the time on cycle. Anabolic steroids take time to saturate at the desired dose within the body. This can be days with orals, or it can be weeks with medium length esters, or it can be over a month with anabolics like EQ, which are especially long esters. So we can safely take a couple of weeks off your cycle as not being in an optimal time for growth. Now granted, you also face this issue with blast and cruise. However, naturally, as with a race, if you're already 10 meters ahead in the 100 meters, you'd have a pretty good advantage. And then there's post-cycle. When you utilize any decent dose of anabolic steroids, your natural production will shut down. Your body will stop producing testosterone. However, you can't begin the process of restarting that production until the drugs that you're utilizing have fully exited the body, or at least close to. And that can take between 2 weeks and, 8 weeks and beyond. Some metabolites of 19 nors have still been found within the body 2 years later. This is an issue, of course, because the body will not restart its natural production, or at least not to full levels, until there is not something else within the body performing the same job. Of course, once this period is over, you're then sat with much below normal testosterone levels, if any. Even if you are young, your body will still take time to bounce back. It's been shown to be up to sort of 6 months to 12 months in studies for the body's production to return to normal. This process is achieved via PCT, post-cycle therapy, which utilizes drugs such as HCG and SERM therapies. Worth noting that these therapies on their own will not come without risks and side effects, and they can take 2 to 3 months to recover natural levels if they manage to do that. This means that by the end of it all, you're spending the same time, if not more time, with suppressed levels of testosterone and hormones than you are with elevated. And that's before you factor in time staying at your natural testosterone level. When you think about the fact that most people, when they cycle on and off anabolics, people tend to be on for, say, an average of 14 weeks. Then they'd spend maybe 4 weeks waiting for their substances to clear, and then they'd spend 4 weeks using HCG, and then you'd spend 4 to 8 weeks using SERMs. So you're talking 3 months there. By that point in time, what do you think the chances are that person wants to spend more time natural? I'd say slim to none. So people tend to hop on almost straight away when their levels are barely recovered, when in fact it would be optimal to spend even more time at that testosterone level. And I'm talking for health reasons, of course, not performance. That's a long period of time to be suboptimal to even retain the mass that you gain. And of course, this means that there's little to no point in actually gaining mass above your natural limitations, because that's going to go pretty damn quick. And then we have the psychological issues. Imagine how detrimental it is to sit in a superhuman state for 3 or 4 months, then quickly to be quite the opposite. Coming off cycle is not fun. I blast and cruise, and coming down to replacement levels feels notably different. My recovery suffers, my strength progression is slower, and my scale weight isn't going to budge very far. In a sport already riddled with mental health issues, performance-enhancing drugs and taking extended periods of time off when you're doing this for vanity metrics anyway may not be a recipe for success. All of this will likely compound stress onto the issues we've already talked about. I don't know about you, but this isn't adding up to be a very pretty picture. And finally, all of these factors mean that running a mild, safer use cycle is of little interest to people who do cycle off. When you're limiting your gaining period to 3 or 4 months of the year, you don't particularly want to be wasting that on mild, long to saturate drugs like primobolan or even equipoise, which despite the kidney issues is at least a bit milder. This means that most will likely blast with fairly toxic compounds at supraphysiological levels, pushing the boundary of the amount of milligrams they can shove into their body per week, and then spend long, depressed, unhealthy times with low natural testosterone, only to repeat the cycle and yield maybe a couple of pounds each time. You may be saying, that's absolutely fine. I don't mind not yielding great results. I just want to be swollen, strong when I'm on, and then I'll happily drop back down to natural levels. Well, let's talk a bit about that natural production of yours. We all know, and it's fairly obvious, that your natural testosterone levels are going to be negatively affected by the amount of time you spend on cycle. In studies, SHBG and testicular volume were affected for up to a year. So would more time on anabolics not be worse then? Well, I'm not sure that it wouldn't be worse, but it's all about relative risk. One cycle is all it might take to suppress or completely shut down your natural testosterone for the long term. The risk is low, but it's present. And contrary to popular belief, many bodybuilders have managed to conceive while on cycle using blast and cruise. This means aspects like fertility are at risk in both methods, especially given most people won't stop at one simple cycle, and over time, the chances are every single time that you cycle off, your natural testosterone production will take a slight hit. Maybe it's just a couple of %, but over time that all adds up, and one day it may not come back at all. And can you guess what that would lead to? That's right, you'd have to use testosterone replacement therapy, effectively being on a cruise for the rest of your life. So you're risking fertility either way. You may end up cruising either way, and bodybuilders can in fact still conceive on cycle. Basically, you'll end up losing all your gains and still having to pin every single week. So with all of this information out there, why do people still cycle on and off? I think naturally people just draw presumptions. They believe that with every single drug, you can generalize to more time using drug is worse. Mainstream information about aspects like blast and cruise aren't really available, simply because who is doing studies on bodybuilders who use a fuck ton of anabolics? To be honest, I classify most people who still cycle on and off as the same kind of people who believe that orals are healthier because they're taken via the mouth and they don't require a needle. Classic drugs propaganda misinformation. However, injectable anabolics are much safer, bypassing the liver and preventing too much damage to that organ. They're also generally milder on your other health markers. The safest and mildest anabolics are in fact injectable, like testosterone and primobolan, and the bioavailability is almost always better, hence why not every single drug is available in oral form. Not all common sense approaches are created equal. A lot of these people tend to believe that they can do one cycle, stay within their natural limits or hit their natural limitation, and then simply maintain that naturally, because within your natural limitations, surely that's a possibility. But there are some issues with this. These people tend to be short-termists. They tend not to think about the bigger picture, hence why they're willing to use and manipulate hormones in order to achieve no particular goal. And they tend to be more worried about things like gyno rather than things like organ damage. They're willing to use drugs to achieve something they can achieve naturally, to the risk of their health. A common trait that I see is that they tend to be annoyed about the rate of progression. They tend to want things now, as all young people have been accused of. But you've got to look beneath the surface and ask why they're so frustrated with natural levels while others are fairly content. Yes, there'll be some aspect of expectations and comparison and societal pressures, but I'm willing to bet there's a decent amount of poor diet, poor training, poor genetics maybe, and a lack of understanding about the actual risks of anabolics. Without the capability or knowledge to add muscle mass consistently to your frame as a natural, what chance do you think people have of retaining peak musculature once you remove anabolics from the equation? Now granted, anabolics do not do everything for you, hence why not everybody who takes them is Mr. Olympia, and your typical gym bros could or could not be on gear. Quite simply, often you can't tell the difference because they don't know what they're doing. But it can help to supplement poor diet and training. Generally speaking, if you are adding stimulus while on anabolics, there is a high chance you'll gain some level of muscle mass. Now granted, when you do have shit diet and training, your progress will not be as fast as if you are optimized in all of those areas, and anabolics can yield a much higher result for somebody who knows what they're doing. So this tends to lead these people who quite simply supplement hard work with drugs to take longer to achieve the same goal and thus undertake more risks just by cumulative time on. This short-term outlook can be particularly dangerous when you factor in their lack of discipline. How long will it take for them to want to spend more time on cycle? How long before moderate doses on that restricted period of time just isn't doing enough for them? What happens when they get frustrated by the lack of retained results and decide that trend's the secret, tren will pack on mass that will stay? This, in my opinion, will produce one of two results. Either they start to use anabolics in a more reckless fashion, or they never use them again at all. In both instances, the cycling approach seems pretty damn useless to me. Do one cycle, get negative side effects, have to deal with the consequences long term, or do one cycle, decide it's not good, go on blast and cruise anyway. All of these reasons are why I stress the importance of making this decision, and why the theoretical person that I've just mentioned, if you have those traits, if that may be a motivation for you to use these drugs, that you simply shouldn't. The chances of achieving peak natural muscle after one cycle is slim to none. The chances of this type of person actually being anywhere near their natural potential already is slim to none. The chances of retaining it if you do achieve it are again slim to none, and one cycle can lead you to TRT for life. Quite simply, you've got to have something that's worth sacrificing that for. Will a weekend in Ibiza be enough for you if you have to deal with that for the rest of your life? Let me tell you that weekend in Ibiza is going to be a lot less fun when your dick don't work. You want to be an IFBB pro, you want to be a pro athlete, then maybe the ends justify the means. But for a casual user, it does not. And if you're going to use them anyway, because let's face it, why the fuck would you listen to me? Do you think you're going to do a cycle after this? If you want to see what my blood test results are like on Blast and Cruise, then click the video and I'll see you over there. And don't forget to like and subscribe.